Hello, my name is Leonardo Christov-Moore. It's my pleasure to be presenting at the International Interdisciplinary Symposium on Neuroscience and Health held in São Paulo. I would like to be there in person, but I will be recording this remotely. So in any case, yes, I am a senior neuroscientist at the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies in Santa Monica, California, where I currently am. And we are a institute that bridges both the leanness of a startup as well as the rigor of academic research. And our work lies at the focus of the neuroscience of transformative experience, ranging from psychedelics, meditation, as well as non-pharmacological forms of inducing psychedelic states. Something we're also very interested in is, well, what should these transformative experiences beget in people? And our main interests there are in prosociality and the mechanisms of social cohesion, such as empathy, compassion, and trust. So today I'll be talking about trust. This is a work that we have been embarking on over the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, the Marcus Vinicius, who was the person who invited me to give this talk, was also the person who invited me to write the chapter that first started this line of work. So I'm very grateful to be speaking on it for you guys today. In any case, trust is obviously such an important topic today because of the systemic lack of trust that there seems to be between social groups, between the population and institutions, at every level, seemingly. And it's a truly fascinating mechanism that, as we'll explore, I believe is not just a nice human feeling or a mechanism for just individual relationships, but is in fact an articulating feature of the entire natural world. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's first start with basically, what do we mean by the natural world? Well, what I mean by that is the world of living agents, right? The world of living beings. And what do I mean by agent? And this is going to be very important. An agent essentially has several properties as we're defining it. An agent is a dynamic system that is something made of parts that interact, that change over time, and that must defy the inevitable flow of entropy dynamically over time. And it must do so by trying to reduce uncertainty about the world, right? And maximize its agency within that world. And what's interesting about this particular way of defining an agent is that you can speak of agentic systems, right? So not just individual organisms like myself, but even tightly knit groups like a family, a society, or an army platoon, a corporation, can be spoken of in terms of its capacity for agenthood based on one basic principle, that it pursue goal states in order to persist in the world, that it pursue goal states that are pertinent to more than the sum of its parts, right? And taken with this definition, we can speak of many kinds of agentic systems. And importantly, a sufficiently complex agentic system can be composed itself of sub-agent systems, right? And as we'll see, this is an important feature of agents in the world. Now, and one way in which this view, I think, also creates a very, I think, compassionate view of the natural world is that all agents in the natural world face the same problem, the same damn problem, which is they face high uncertainty about what is out in the world because they can't be everywhere, they can't see everything, and they simply aren't equipped for that. And they face limited agency within the world. No agent that we know of can control every possible future state of itself or of the world, right? So all agents face high uncertainty and limited agency. And that's already a problem when you think about just trying to navigate the physical world, right, of rocks and water and wind and resources, et cetera. But it's even more of a problem because most agents also face the particular uncertainty posed by other living agents. So what's different? Now, why is that a specifically different problem? Because for this simple reason, right? Like, let's say this is not an agent, right? At least not that I know of. If I hold it and I move it certain ways, it has pretty predictable deformations. It has pretty predictable qualities. If I drop it, It'll fall more or less the same way every time, right? Now, what if I were to grab one of my colleagues, for example, Nico, and I were to lift him up and drop him? First of all, he'd ask me, why did you drop me? He'd respond a certain way. Then if I went to grab him again, he might be like, no, I'm not. And then I might end up chasing him around the lab. So each time there'd be a very nonlinear response to my behavior that's very, very hard to model. And in fact, is best modelable by actually modeling the unseen drives and intentions of the agent, its own world modeling. So that's the problem, right? When we're trying to model the uncertainty posed by trying to coordinate with other agents. And, as much as we like to think of, individuals as an island and everything, the fact is the vast, vast majority of living agents in the world rely on other agents, coordinating with other agents to survive in one way or another. Even the most isolated predators during mating season have to anticipate and respond correctly to and coordinate with other agents to survive and reproduce. And this is almost entirely the rule. There are some exceptions, right? Some deep sea animals that basically live, 99% of their life in isolation. Fine. But generally speaking, we have to coordinate with other agents to survive. It's essential. And so we have to mitigate that uncertainty, right? This same problem that we can't surveil and understand all the hidden states of other agents, and we can't, for the most part, control them perfectly. So trust rises to meet this particular uncertainty posed by the necessity of coordination with other agents in the world. And in doing that, I want to add one more really important quality of what we mean by agentic systems, which goes back to a great work from a great theorem from information theory, or cybernetics rather, called the Conant and Ashby. There's the good regulator theorem proposed by Conant and Ashby, and which postulates that any system that seeks to regulate anything that seeks to regulate a system must itself be a model of that system. And they show it mathematically, but I can give a sort of a good basic example. And this is going to sound kind of silly, but it needs to be slightly silly before it becomes too complicated. Let's say that I'm just a being, right? I'm a being, and my only world is a sheet in front of me. And every so often, things will poke out of that sheet. And let's say what's actually on the other end of that sheet is a hand, but I don't know that. Things will poke out of that sheet. And sometimes if I'm in the wrong position, the little pokes will hurt me, right? And sometimes though, if I get it just right, I can bite off little pieces of what pokes out, and that helps me, right? So then I'm going to be invested in figuring out, reducing uncertainty about when is the next poke going to come, and understanding how I have to behave to avoid getting hurt and keep surviving in the world, because all I'm getting basically are signals that was bad, that was good, right? And basically it can be shown, but also it seems rather intuitive, that if you can't see what's going on, you're trying to predict where these next pokes through the fabric are going to come from, the most expedient way to do that is to model the unseen causes, the unseen connotations of this thing you're getting, which is just pokes. All you get is pokes. So you have to model the connotations. So in sort of Bayesian statistics, what this is called is you must develop a system of priors, right? A system of sort of beliefs about the connotations of incoming sensory data. And as you'll see, that becomes really important later. This fact that agents are all doing this. They're trying to embody models of priors concerning sensory data coming into the world, which is essentially its connotation for themselves, right? So what trust does in this is, it is kind of what we'd call a virtual minimizer of uncertainty. Now, why is that? Because when I decide to trust another system, when I decide to basically trust in it, I'm essentially making assumptions about that other system, that other agent, and kind of assuming that my assumptions are true, right? Because if you knew everything and could control everything, you wouldn't need to trust. Trust always is based on the risk of betrayal and on the fact that you don't know. That's the whole point of trusting. The vulnerability of trusting is that you make assumptions and you just decide confidently that those assumptions are true. And it's useful, right? Because now you don't have to do all the verification. You don't have to do as much of the control. But it's also risky, right? Because as you can see here, when you and basically what trust then essentially does is it allows you to have these high confidence assumptions about the other agent, right? So in this very simple example using people, you can see how the same two expressions, right, might be interpreted very differently. So in a high trust situation, a smile is, good, everything's good, not a threat. And even an angry expression, right, if it's in someone that you really trust, is, either a joke or it's a low-level conflict, something that can be handled. Its allostatic connotation, its connotation for you as an organism is relatively unrisky and often even good. But you're making that assumption because you don't know what's in the head of of the agent that you're trusting, right? Whereas in a low trust situation, there's simply much more uncertainty about the unseen sort of motivations and unseen states of the other agent. In this case, in a low trust situation, right? An angry expression could mean anywhere from threat to fear, alarm. It can mean the person is insane. It can mean they're malevolent, they're badly intentioned towards you, or it could mean that they're simply, in a different world than you, right? They're not something you can comprehend. Whereas if they're smiling, yes, they might be, it might mean that there's good intentions, could mean they're deceiving you, could mean that again, that they're crazy. You don't know. This is the problem of low trust situations generally, is just increased uncertainty, which is inherently stressful, right? And as we'll see, things like stress, things like feeling in this framework are constructs that are actually nicely applicable to many, many kinds of agents, even agents that don't necessarily have consciousness or subjectivity. For example, just to give a sort of multi-scale definition of stress that I think is really useful, if you're talking about how agents are always pursuing goal states, right? Our goal state is essentially, I am like this. I would like to be like this, and it can be observed in many, many kinds of systems, even very simple ones. That much of behavior is just designed to reduce the mismatch between how things are and how things would like to be. Right? That's a basic aspect of being a living being. And stress can be really nicely and simply defined as the response to that mismatch. And if you think about it, stress in any kind of system is, what does it do? Stress usually triggers a higher than average energy or metabolic outlay in order to reduce that mismatch, which is interesting because you can use that to model, it makes sense from the perspective of a person, right? If someone gets stressed out, they start casting about for more options, they decide to use more energy, they try to break their way out of a bad situation, run faster than they would, figure out other solutions, right? But you can observe it even in single-celled organisms. It's been observed that the same kind of stress responses that we can observe in a complex individual like myself or my colleagues can be observed in single-cell organisms. And what does it tend to promote? It tends to promote greater movement, greater agitation. For example, in cells that are trying to move from one layer of a growing sort of inside an embryo, for example, you can have cells that are trying to differentiate and move to where they're supposed to be. You can see very small, simple equivalency of a stress response that tends to cause basically movement, not just of the cell itself, but the cells around it. And what that movement does is it allows for the cell to more easily migrate to where it's going. So not to get too far afield, but what is interesting about this is that it suggests that many of these mechanisms that we often think of as just, purely high level, the product of, or the property of complex agents like ourselves, are actually ubiquitous mechanisms in the natural world, which I think, it increases kind of our camaraderie with other agentic systems, gives you, again, this kind of compassion for the fact that we all face these same problems and we all get stressed out about them. And we all get kind of calm and a little happier when the stress resolves. So, like I said, so trust can be thought of, it's a wager, right? It's a bet that we make. But so you might question, well, what is that wager based on? And we propose, and this is decently in line with many of the theories that have been proposed. We propose, and what we're attempting to do here is formulate it in such a way that you can apply it to many kind of agentic systems, even ones that aren't conscious. But what we propose is that trust can be modeled, can be thought of as a a wager on three assumptions, three predicates, which we consider to be more or less as far down as you can boil them down. The first is predictability, right? I'm going to use a human example because it's more intuitive, but if I'm going to trust somebody and not trust that they will do something, that's different. I can trust that my phone will turn on or off when I press a button. That's not the same thing as trusting it or trusting someone as an agent. But to trust someone else, I first of all need to have some confidence about their future events, about their future behavior. They need to be somewhat predictable to me, somewhat modelable. They need to be reliable, basically. And there are some views that take this to be basically the only requisite for trust. Just, can I trust that a future event will happen? But when it comes to an agent, that's not enough, right? Because an agent that you can predict will be harmful to you, right? An authoritarian, you can rightly predict that they will probably infringe on your individual liberty. That doesn't mean you should trust them, right? They're just predictable. They're predictably bad, predictably malevolent. So that's not enough, right? So what else do we need? Well, benevolence, right? You might say, well, okay, if to trust something, I need to be able to reliably predict that coordinating with this agent will be beneficial for me, right? That it is well-intentioned towards me, or at least that coordinating with it will end up being a net benefit for myself, right? And when we were first formulating some of this work, we would talk about this on my early co-authors, and predictability and benevolence, they get you a lot of the way there, but, and this is a key example that came up in conversation. What if you have a good friend, or let's say probably a new friend, who has shown themselves to be very predictable, very reliable, and really benevolent towards you. And let's assume they are genuinely benevolent. But let's say that you find out, as you're getting to know them, that they're part of a doomsday cult that basically says that we have to all die before this certain comet passes in the sky if we want to reach thereafter. And so what if this predictably benevolent friend offers kindly, for your own good, to share with you some poison so that you can die before the comet comes? How nice of them, right? From their point of view. But clearly, they are not sharing the same notion of what is good for you, right? Their worldview, their values in this context of this relationship is not compatible with yours. So that's the third aspect, right? To trust another agent, they have to be predictably benevolent within a compatible worldview, right? So those are the three assumptions that we make with trust. And we in the paper, which we currently have in archive, I'll share the link as well, and it will be coming out in Psychological Review either at the end of this year or early the next, which is great, long effort. But we also formalize these in terms of information theory. So I'll briefly cover those, but without dwelling on them too long. Essentially, predictability is simply the amount of uncertainty in the model, in the context-specific model of the other agent. Benevolence is the anticipated allostatic gain posed by future coordination. And compatibility can be thought of as mutual information between the predicted mutual information between the truster's agent, the trusting agent's world model, and the world model of the trustee. Essentially, how much uncertainty is reduced about their world model if you know my world model, right? And this allows us to, in theory, which is something we'll be testing in future experiments and simulations, to, in theory, model these predicates of trust in virtually any kind of agentic system, even very basic ones or even collective super individual ones. Now, remember early on we were talking about how agents can be thought of as, in some sense, embodying a model of the world that is predictive or anticipatory, and that is composed of priors, right? Which is another way of saying beliefs, but that avoids some of the subjective, the implications for subjectivity that the word belief often connotes. So we're just going to use the term priors, but basically what we're talking about is beliefs, right? And one of our main postulates with this framework, which I think is probably the crucial one, is that trust is ultimately a gate on the sharing of priors, right? That And what does this mean? It's if I trust another agent, not only am I trusting that the signals they give me, right? The finger poke through the fabric, right? Not only am I trusting that the signals they give me um I have reliable estimates of their connotations, right? But also that the information they give me about the world is accurate, right? If a trusted colleague tells me that there is a fight outside the building and that I shouldn't go down, I might look, but from the perspective of, like, a nihilistic spectator, but I'm not going to doubt that that's the case. I will update my world model immediately if it's a trusted conspecific, if a trusted other tells me something, if they tell me something about how they're feeling, if they even, and this is where it starts getting interesting, if they tell me something about me, I will start to, that will make me more likely to integrate their beliefs, their priors about me, the world, or themselves, or even about the future, the past, etc. I will be more likely to integrate that into my world model the more I trust them. And like I said, not just beliefs about the world, but this extends, I think, to all the given ways that we share priors. And what's interesting is, as we comb the literature to keep looking for different examples of how and why this might be the case, it turns out that trust and affiliation are some of the main determinant factors for um, a series of phenomena that I've studied a great deal in my graduate work, which is neural resonance, or many of you have probably encountered it of mirroring. So it's been found, it's one of the coolest phenomena. It's been found that when humans or many other animals, and in fact we keep finding similar responses in more and more simple animals, which is interesting. When we see another person um, moving, right, or evincing an emotion, or experience in pain, or experience, nausea, etc., we not only understand to some extent what they're feeling, but we also share in the feeling. And that seems to be happening because our own neural systems that we use to process that same sensation, were it happening to ourselves, we process it in others. And what's interesting, right, is that you can think of that as prior sharing, right? Like, with something that's been shown about this neural resonance, about mirroring, is that even though it's automatic, it's highly context specific, right? If I show you a picture of someone smiling, you will probably show not only like sub-threshold tugs up on your cheeks, your own muscle systems, your affective system will, light up or become active as if you were experiencing that happy emotion. But what has been shown is, if I then tell you that that photo, right, that person is in fact a serial killer that has, tortured and murdered hundreds of people, before you even have time to go like, well, I'm going to downgrade my empathy, you will show a highly differential response. And this isn't just the case for that very extreme example. It's been shown that, for example, our automatic sensory motor and pain matrix responses to another person in pain, right? Our pain system's activating at the same time. Um, it's been shown that if you modulate the trust that the person has in the other person, it'll modulate the extent to which their neural systems will respond in the same way, which you can think of essentially as prior sharing, right? If another person is um, showing cues like they're actually in pain, um, for you to respond as if pain has occurred now in the world is essentially to share their prior. You're sharing the connotation of this data that you're seeing, rather than thinking that, for example, they're deceiving you, or that maybe they're a completely different type of organism than you, because, for example, another one of the main factors that modulates this mirroring response is if you think the agent you're seeing is artificial, or a computer, or something, basically not at all like you, right? So we can see that these same predicates of trust seem to govern the extent to which we integrate the allostatic sort of. Allostatic is a shorthand for sort of the connotations for the maintenance of life, right? If the allostatic connotations of a sensory cue, the extent to which we integrate them into our own world model, seems to be heavily gated by trust. And this, aside from being fascinating, right, and allowing for trust to help us, expand our world, basically, has a lot of interesting relational connotations. Basically, it's part of why trust is so desirable and so calming and so, interesting and useful, is that because if my colleague tells me there's something dangerous outside the building, I no longer need to go and verify and find out for myself. I can focus on maybe figuring out another way out of the building. I can help coordinate, helping people get out another way. I can make some calls to the police while he's doing his own thing. We can now engage essentially in coordinated, specialized behavior because we're not having to all do the same jobs, right? And you can think about the classic example with this is the one cited by Tomasello, et cetera, is with the evolution of group of big game hunting, for example, right? When a group of hominids is trying to bring down, a mastodon or some large or large prey, if they all try and do the same job without coordinating with each other and communicating, they're going to fail, right? Some of them have to distract it, other people have to corral it, and other people have to get it into a position so that another team can come in and bash it over the head with a rock. So we need for coordinated behavior that an individual cannot do alone. And this includes just living in a society. We need to be able to trust one another so that instead of spending this time monitoring and verifying that they're doing their part, we can focus on our specialized task within a collective effort. So trust permits us to devote a maximal amount of resources towards our specialized task within a joint effort, allowing us to specialize, to coordinate, et cetera. And also, it actually can make communication of all these different, on all these prior levels, right? I'm using the example here. This is kind of like verbal, but take this to mean all these forms of communication that we do between each other that are nonverbal, verbal, all the ways that we coordinate. It actually makes those more efficient. Trust acts as a form of what's called in information theory compression, right? Which basically means that I need less of a signal to convey the desired packet of information on the other end. And if you want, a good classic example of this in daily life is what happens when you start becoming really good friends with someone over time. You start to have in-jokes and a little private language among yourselves where you can convey more and more and more with less and less and less. And so it increases the bandwidth of communication and reduces the amount of energy needed to do that communication, which, that's just like a fun example between friends, but think about what that actually means in terms of systems and the efficiency of systems, which if we think about, what all agentic systems are trying to do in the world is they're trying to persist in the most energetically efficient way possible, right? Whether it's in the natural world or not, efficiency is king, right? The minimal energy use is what drives pretty much all most of the functions of the world in some capacity. Which is funny because that's even a principle in the non-living world, right? The principle of least action. It seems like all of nature at every level is just trying to do things with the least energy as possible, right? And trust is just another, fine example of that same principle in action. So here we're seeing how this relational aspect of trust has advantages for collectives, right? And in so doing, what is happening as people are expanding, as individuals and agents are expanding their agency and expanding the breadth of their knowledge about the world, is that they start to engage in levels of agency and levels of knowledge that are beyond the reach of a single individual. In other words, they start to engage in collective world modeling and collective agency about the world. They start tackling this same problem that all agents have together, right? And as they do so, some interesting things start happening over time. Well, obviously they become more specialized. So if they become more specialized, what does that mean? They're less able to survive on their own. They're better at one main job, but they can't do all the jobs, right? And we see this in our society. Most people living today could not, if dropped by themselves, and we can see this with a couple of TV shows, right? Cannot by themselves just be dropped into a place and suddenly engage in all the functions necessary for a human to survive. We rely on others now to survive to a greater extent than ever before. We're interdependent because of our specialization, even though as a group, we're able to achieve more than an individual ever could. And as agents become more interdependent, they also start basically acting more like a new level of agenthood themselves. And this can be observed and modeled in the evolution of all living beings. We didn't, I mean, depending on your belief system, but I would say, most scientists would say, we didn't just pop into place like this, right? We came from simpler systems, aggregating together, starting to act like a single agent and becoming single agents themselves. And then those new agents at higher levels of complexity, aggregating, specializing, coordinating to become, multicellular, then pluricellular organisms until you get to these, aggregated systems like ourselves. And increasingly, the aggregated collective systems that we're now part of that more and more begin to act like organisms themselves, right? So this is kind of you could think of it as like the emergent postulate of this whole framework about what trust is trust is not the only one. That would be, that would be arrogant to say, right? But it's certainly, I think, one of the principal articulating features of the entire natural world. It's the mechanism, this progressive mechanism of collectivization, specialization, and aggregation into new levels of agenthood that recursively happens until you get about to, I'd say we're around here, maybe starting to get to this point, and until we maybe become something, do or don't. It's not like it's inevitable, but it does seem to be a progression toward which all agents, are drawn, or agentic systems are drawn, again, because of energetic efficiency, right? Till we become something like the Borg of Star Trek. And I count as one of my great personal accomplishments that we managed to keep the pew pew of the Starship Enterprise attacking the Borg in this figure. Yes. So in any case, that's a bit of a roller coaster, but that is our view of multi-scale trust. And the reason why this is called toward multi-scale trust is because this framework, at the end of the day, it's a model. All models are wrong, but some are useful. We're going to see in coming years through work that we'll be doing and on a growing web network of colleagues, if this is a useful way to model the way systems collaborate and coordinate, not just humans, maybe help us regrow trust in our organizations and between them, but also in non-living systems. A lot of our work is now concerned with AI. And so we have to think about, how do we build AI agents that we can trust? How do we build agents that trust us and that trust one another so that they can coordinate? Because, there isn't time to cover this as its own separate subject now, but everything I've told you has its dark mirror image, right? The betrayal of trust, the breakdown of trust is one of the most traumatic and costly updatings of world models that any being can go through. It's why betrayal is the most traumatic experience that most agents can conceive of. And it doesn't just make sense from thinking about our own personal experiences, but if you think about what has been happening, if trust between two agent systems is betrayed, it means that you have to now spend from all this time and energy, not just revising your model of the trustee, of the agent you trusted. You have to now revise your model of all the past interactions you had, everything they told you about the world, all the cues they gave you about their own behavior and others, which revises also your estimation of how good you are at trusting and your mechanisms for allocating trust, which are crucial. It affects your future trust relationship. It's one of the worst things that can happen. And hence why, if you look at like Dante's Inferno, the bottom circle of hell is reserved not for murderers, not for thieves, for traitors, right? This is the worst sin across the natural world. And as they also say, trust is gained by drops and lost by buckets, right? An implication of this in terms of its role in the aggregation of all these successful group systems is that, the siloing of information that is caused by these short-sighted, profit motives in social media and media apparatuses, for example, and all the demagogues and people around them that take advantage of it, they're breaking down links that are incredibly hard to restore. And if it wasn't already seen as dangerous now, I think a framework like this also helps further illustrate what a dangerous thing we are embarking on in our society if we allow ourselves to fall into, such incompatible worlds with one another, and what a risk it poses for the stability of our systems, right? In any case, so leave you with that nice uplifting note. Shameless plug, you can find the archived version of the paper here at this QR code. It should be coming out in Psychological Review. I'm very thankful for all of the different amazing co-authors, several of who are in the room with me now, for making this paper come together. It's been a work of over 3 years. I'll leave that up for a second, but also I'll forward the link.